Well, hello, everybody. It's May the 1st, 2025, and I'm your proud host, David Leis, for the live edition of Leaders on the Frontier. How are you today? Um, to be quite frank, it is a historic time, I think, for our nation. I'm sure you agree. And so I am delighted that we have three very special guests that are joining us today for yet another barn burner of a discussion regarding the election, its aftermath, understanding it. And we also want to point to the future and say, how do we keep this country together, quite frankly? Is Canada in doubt? Well, and what are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves as we look to the future? So this is May the 1st. This is the so-called May Day for some around the world, and we certainly celebrate workers. But we also know that on this day, our country faces a lot of questions. There's a lot of news going on today. And so we're going to be bringing on our guests in a moment. But one of the things I wanted to highlight is that I had the privilege of joining an election panel on Merit TV Canada, and we had some 55,000 on watching the program. And you may be asking yourselves, what is Merit TV? Well, you can find Merit TV from coast to coast to coast in this country. You can look on your cable provider. You've got some information right there in terms of where you can watch Merit TV Canada. But we're also on TELUS as well, and Bell, and of course Rogers Networks, among others, MTS, and I believe a number of other networks shortly in Saskatchewan as well. So we're really excited about that. And the whole vision of Merit TV is to bring the entire country news and programming that really grounds this country within the truth and facts and evidence and healthy discussion and different points of view, but in a way that unites this country. Information is very, very important. So you may have heard that on this day that Trump talks are underway or will be underway shortly between our newly elected Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and of course, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So it'll be very interesting. There's a picture of the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, at his election evening rally and celebratory evening. And you notice there's the statement there, we are Canada strong. So that's certainly a question. Are we strong? And we're going to be able to parse a little bit more about, well, what is that government going to be doing as we look to the future? And we also know that some of the results were very interesting. And so to help me talk a little bit more about the election, first off the bat, and I just want to mention, we really appreciate your comments. We literally get hundreds of them. And Robert Kerr says, it looks like the federal Liberals were successful in gaslighting a number of baby boomers by fear mongering on Trump. Shameful. So that's a very good comment, Robert. And Freddie Freeloader, I'm not sure who Freddie is exactly, but he says, not my prime minister. So kind of a play on words there. Well, there's certainly a lot of emotions in Canada right now, to be frank. And that's one of the debates is really, what was the election about? Was it premised more on vision and hope, or was it premised more on fear, or a bit of both? So we're going to try to parse this, and I can't think of a better friend to do this with than the Honorable Grant Devine, the former Premier of Saskatchewan. And so a warm welcome to you, Grant Devine.
Thank you very much. Very good to be here.
Well, Grant, I'm really honored that you could join us for an initial conversation about the election. And I want to, like, you have seen so many elections, certainly in your time, and the challenges of both Western Canada and working with within a federal system that makes Canada quite a set of dynamic provinces. But what was your perspective on what were the key issues that our country was facing?
Well, it's a very good question. And like many of you, I've thought a lot about it. It seems to me there was a bit of a false narrative in that somebody had to stand up to Trump. And that dominated CBC, CTV particularly over and over again, that it would be better to have Mark Carney rather than Poilievre stand up to Trump. But it's interesting because Donald Trump really probably didn't care who it was as the Prime Minister of Canada. He's going to do what he's going to do. And so it became as you said, with the younger generation, it was kind of a fear that, gosh, what's Trump going to do to us? And who can best stand up to him? Well, I don't think it's going to matter. And I don't think Trump really cared who was the Prime Minister of Canada. He's going to do what he's going to do. And that took over much of the concern by ordinary people really across Canada. What about my standard of living? And how am I going to, pay my bills? And those kinds of pocketbook issues. Where they did reign ahead, the Conservatives won the riding over and over and over again. In fact, the popular vote went up as high as it's ever been in decades. So it's interesting that if you stuck to the real issues of the day rather than worry about Donald Trump, you win. And if you were sort of guided into saying, well, somebody has to beat up on Donald Trump, then of course they're going to vote Liberal. The second thing is that so many people, particularly in the NDP, decided they were going to leave the party and join the Liberal Party. And they fell for that narrative. Well, we got to stand up to Trump. But it's sort of, if you will, in the NDP mind, I guess, anybody but Conservatives. But in any event, we're going to have to see if Mr. Carney, the Prime Minister, who was duly elected, will live up to some of his promises. So it's going to be interesting to watch, because he kind of flipped in his tone, if you allow me, sounding like a conservative. He was going to build this and do that and, straighten out everything else. But in his lifetime, I mean, he's pretty much a liberal. And it's interesting, if Donald Trump, I think today or yesterday, said, well, I'm really happy to have Mr. Carney as the Prime Minister. Look, Mr. Trump doesn't like the Democrats, and the Liberal Party of Canada is left of the Democrats. So I think Mr. Trump is smiling, right? Because he knows how to handle them. And he didn't want to handle a real, if you will, a conservative. And if you will, Mr. Trump is a conservative, to take each other on. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I sincerely hope the tone of the new Prime Minister lives up to the tone. He said he's going to build pipelines for LNG across the country. He's talking about a lot of money being borrowed as an investment. He calls it an investment. And he's talking about economic development and so forth. So if he follows through on that, it'll be quite a change from what he's done in the past or his leanings. So I mean, people can just hope that he gets it, and good for the country. And if he does, I'll applaud him. Now, if he falls back, doesn't allow pipelines, etc., the carbon tax to continue or brought back, then it's maybe it's a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing, as they say on the ranch here. So we'll see. But I wish him luck. I hope he lives up to his campaign slogans, and if he does, it'll be good for Canada. If he falls back, well, then we'll see. So it's interesting times. I mean, as always, we wish the best for Canada and hope the Prime Minister really sticks to his guns.
Okay, well, that's a brilliant summation. You can see, audience, why I thought Grant would be a great guest, and I think you've given a kind of a brilliant summary analysis of the key questions, and so I want to parse those a little bit. And we've got a lot of questions and comments rolling in here from the audience, and we really appreciate it. So I'm going to get to some of those in a second as well. But I want to start off with the whole notion, and you put it right off the top, Mr. Devine, and that was there was a false narrative. What do you mean by that?
Well, it ended up the election for a lot of young people was about who can stand up to Donald Trump. And, I don't think Donald Trump cares who's the prime minister of Canada. I mean, he's taking
Mhm.
on China, he takes on India, takes on the European Economic Community, etc. He's not going to worry about who's the prime minister of Canada. So that argument let people say, well, who would be the best man to take on Trump? Well, again, I mean, I guess I'm repeating myself and I apologize, but I don't think it matters to Mr. Trump. In fact, the Liberal Party of Canada is far left of the Democratic Party in the United States, and Trump doesn't
Okay.
like left wingers. So
Yeah.
evidently, he's happy that the Liberals are in. And
Mhm.
I mean, he's going to do what he's going to do. But I mean, so to get people to vote that issue rather than the bread and butter issues of your standard of living and how you're going to pay your bills was overlooked by an awful lot of young people. And that's where the rubber hit the road. And that's
Okay,
why
so but
you saw.
in that context, though, would you say, Grant, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but obviously the context was that as recently as early January, I mean, as I recall, it was on January 6th that Prime Minister Trudeau resigned. And prior to that, you had the Conservative Party out front with approximately, depending on which poll you looked at, a 20 percentage point lead. I mean, this is just significant. It was almost like many people were making the assumption that, well, there's a high likelihood of there being a conservative government. So something entirely flipped. And you're saying that there's a false narrative. And that really got many Canadians exercise on an emotional level, and they would put aside the bread and butter issues like affordability. I mean, the last 10 years have been, frankly, and I mean this objectively, a train wreck of an economy the last 10 years at 0.5% growth the last 10 years. They put that all aside and said, we think Mr. Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, the former governor of the Bank of England, was the leader that we could trust to deal with Orange Man Bad. Is that another way to summarize this situation?
Well, I think it is. And, you know, I think there was a bit of, I think it's fair to say, a bit of a bias in our national television networks. I mean, all they played was the issue. Let me remind you, when Mr. Trudeau was in power, we never heard about the argument who's going to take on Trump. We didn't hear that. And then all of a sudden, the argument becomes who's going to take on Trump. So they
Mm,
did a pretty good job of making that the issue. If,
yes.
and so
Yeah.
an awful lot of younger people said, well, gosh, we've got to have somebody to stand up to Trump. All of a sudden, now, if Mr. Trudeau had stayed in
Yeah.
power, the Conservatives would be in government. But because they changed, again, the narrative of the election, which wasn't on the standard of living and, bread and butter issues, it was about Mr. Trump. Then over and over, day after day after day, the national media just kept saying, well, that's the issue. That's the issue. Who's going to take on Trump? Who's going to take on Trump?
Okay.
So it became an issue. And again, I don't really think Mr. Trump cares. I mean,
Yeah.
frankly,
No, it's a
given his
very good point.
attitude and his background, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure it really doesn't matter to him. In fact, he's got a weaker left wing uh, prime minister than than he could hope for.
Indeed. So on that note, I want to welcome our next guest, a regular Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontiers. So a warm welcome to you, Marco. Oh, I think we're muted here, but we're going to pick up that mic somehow. But I do have a question in the audience in the meantime. It's interesting. There's a comment from my 2 cents earlier up that summarizes, I think, kind of the thesis that Mr. Devine was saying. Too many people voted with their emotions rather than their senses and memory of the past 10 years. So thank you for that comment. And there's so many other great comments here. So we have a lot of big issues here. And of course, Lauren says the NDP is a big reason the Liberals won. They threw the votes to them. Now, so there's different ways to parse this. One would say the other big story within this was not only the voting for emotion vis-a-vis the misses of Donald Trump. But it was also the collapse of the NDP, because, as you said, Mr. Devine, the record vote towards the Conservatives, I think they picked up some 28 seats. Really, I mean, this is like, and you would have recalled this, but back in, what was it, 1984, when Mr. Mulroney won an incredible landslide. I think it was 211 seats then. But here you have the map of Canada in terms of the key ridings across the country. So, Marco, what would be your take on why we ended up with a minority Liberal government? And do you buy Mr. Devine's thesis? Oh, I'm afraid we seem to have a technical issue still there. But we'll try to figure that out here. But we've still got comments here from Lauren, who says all people needed to do was to do some research on Carney and know that Trump loves him, which isn't good for Canada. That's an interesting comment in terms of, again, preference. Who is better to negotiate with the United States? So what about the collapse of the NDP, Mr. Devine? What's your take on why the NDP collapsed?
Well, it's interesting. My grandfather used to say that liberals were just NDPs in a hurry, and it's interesting. They decided that there wasn't any place for them, and so where are they going to go? And I think on top of that, they were like an awful lot of other people who just said, "Look, we got to take on Trump one way or the other," and they would opt for Carney rather than a conservative. And I'm not sure they would vote conservative anyway. In many ridings in British Columbia, though, we found that the NDP did support conservatives, and I'm happy to make that observation. So again, if you looked at the pocketbook issues, conservatives, well, they're up to as high as they've been in decades. And under any other sort of circumstances, or again, a false narrative, Mr. Poilievre would have been the prime minister. So it's an interesting shift for the NDP. I'm sure they're very disappointed, and in large part. And for those that voted conservatives on the pocketbook issues, I congratulate them. I mean, you were on the money.
Bring back Marco, as well as our next guest, the Honorable Dan McTeague. And Dan, a warm welcome to you. As a former parliamentary secretary in Liberal governments, I believe, with Jean Chrétien and, of course, Paul Martin. So a warm welcome to you, Dan, and welcome back, Marco.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sorry about
so I'm going to turn to you, Marco, first of all. What's your summary of how we ended up with a minority Liberal government?
Well, I think apart from the fact that the Liberals were so far behind, there are in elections are always competitions for a narrative. And so who presents the narrative that best connects with the electorate is going to be the one that is more successful. So in this case, Grant's sort of thesis that the people were scared or somehow scared about Trump and who was going to face Trump. That was the narrative of the Liberals, and they were fairly successful at painting that one. Remember that Trump had been sort of a boogeyman way before that. For a long time, many of the outlets in Canada, including the CBC, favored stories, negative stories, typically about Trump, than basic sort of domestic stories. There was a certain kind of obsession about Trump, and so they sort of capitalized on that. The Conservatives had a different narrative. They had a narrative of change. They had a narrative of an economic focus. They had a narrative of a better, cleaner, more efficient government. And for some reason, if you look at it, both narratives were pretty competitive, given what we know now about how far apart they were, which is not very much. But the reality is, people who were scared about Trump, and they were largely older people, which is a whole different story. They were that narrative was more successful.
Dan, what's your take? How do we end up with a Liberal minority government?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with fear. We saw fear work very well for the Liberals, although not as much as they would have wanted to in 2021 using COVID. We saw the idea that the orange-haired man bad south of the border was the only issue in this campaign, even though it should have been something like, for instance, affordability, concerns about the expenditures of the government. Things that would have normally been a problem, and in fact had been articulated a month earlier in the campaign, suddenly disappeared temporarily. And of course, the new government will come back in and have to confront those once and for all. But I suspect there was a lot to do with people being completely distracted by Donald Trump.
Okay, so Donald Trump, gosh, this sounds like foreign interference to me. And that's certainly not to put aside issues like the documented cases of foreign interference from China, as well as all kinds of dynamics around India, among others. But it is really remarkable that our nation is where it's at. And just to recap, in terms of a slide here, we have in terms of some of the popular vote here. And just a quick recap. I just want to mention again, the Liberals ended up with 169, the Conservatives at 144, up 28. The NDP was 7, losing their party status, and of course the Bloc at 22. And this is results by province. If you can see the popular vote, you can see that it was pretty neck and neck in terms of the popular vote here. But again, the story was the implosion of the NDP as well here. And so I want to just get back to that in a moment here. So I want to go back to you, Marco and Dan, and then make our way back to Mr. Devine here. So what's your thoughts, Marco, on why the NDP kind of were missing in action here?
Well, yeah, in many ways we are kind of. I wonder if we are witnessing the collapse of the entire movement that started in the prairies with the CCF. The reality is this: there is always a market for left-wing ideas, and in a country like Canada, perhaps that market is even more robust than everything else. But as Dan has said before, the Liberal Party of Canada completely crowded the traditional grounds of the NDP politically, and essentially pushed them out. Not to mention, of course, the fact that they willingly got into the government bed with Trudeau, and they became the scapegoat. I think that is a lesson, by the way, that Blanchet is going to remember. He's not going to be too keen on jumping into bed with Carney for that reason. The Liberals came out smelling like roses in spite of the disaster of the last 10 years. The NDP seems to have been made into the scapegoat. But I don't mean to say that the NDP is not responsible for what happened, that this is something that was done to them. This is very much self-inflicted in many ways. And the fact that they kept the leader that they kept for 3 consecutive elections. Let's remember that the NDP has been in a kind of a free fall since Layton. And the replacement got pushed out, Mulcair, because he lost a few seats, well, maybe perhaps more than a few, but he didn't do as well as Layton. And when it came to Singh didn't do as well as Mulcair and kept continuously dropping, and they kept him. So had they perhaps been more proactive in getting a different kind of leader and leadership in the party, they might have forestalled this collapse.
What's your take, Dan, on the NDP?
Well, yes, I think Marco was absolutely correct. The NDP played this to their detriment, and they did so constantly coming back and saying they wouldn't support the Liberals, and then coming out and then, in fact, supporting the Liberals. And I think the revelation by Jagmeet Singh at the end, this was really meant as nothing more than to stop the Conservatives from getting a majority. Really said all you know about the NDP, and that's important because I think Grant Devine pointed out very clearly that in some cases you had New Democrats cheesed off and they went and voted Conservative. I mean, this is an existential event for the NDP. I'm not sure it's going to recover. I mean, stranger things have happened, but or by the Liberal Party, I think this is very much a self-inflicted wound, the likes of which many people are not going to forget for quite some time. It's very reminiscent of 1993, when Bob really scuppered the chances of the federal NDP way back then. It took them at least 2 terms to really get back on track.
It's remarkable. I mean, I'm having a conversation about the aftermath of the election with the Honorable Dan McTeague, Liberal MP, the Honorable Grant Devine, former Premier of Saskatchewan, and Dr. Marco Noverol-Gini, Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier. So welcome to our discussion. Be sure to like our conversation. That always helps with these little algorithms in the back end here. But we are so delighted with the participation today, and we really appreciate the many comments. So Grant, I wanted to just ask you as well a little bit about Pierre Poilievre. It's interesting that there's a lot of electoral success there, but he lost his own Ottawa seat. And so does that put his leadership in jeopardy? It sounds like there's been a lot of affirmations about his leadership going forward, but any comment on that?
Well, just before I comment on that, going back to our just previous conversation, the NDP had a chance to bring down the government in a vote of non-confidence in Parliament, and while Trudeau was still the Prime Minister. And if that had happened, the Conservatives would have won. The NDP would have probably picked up some seats. Now that hangs on the NDP strategy. They decided to support the Liberals, and the Liberals wiped them out. And so it's a very interesting lesson.
Well said.
So,
well said. And Grant, on that point though, but doesn't that underline also the dynamic within the party, if I understand it? And I certainly have friends that have been active in the NDP. This concern that they've shifted from a party working for the working people, the blue collar working people, to one that is very ideological, so-called woke party, like more popular in the academic faculty rooms rather than the working people. And I think that's kind of where you had a real shift to the Conservatives, I think. Would you buy that theory as well?
For sure. I mean, I'm reminded when I was first elected, I sat down in the legislature in Alberta with Peter Lougheed, and he said this to me. He said, there's a big role for government in health and highways, education. They're natural public goods, and you're going to have to spend that. On the other side, he said, look out across the city of Edmonton. That's where we make the money, in industry, in oil and gas and agriculture and lumber and manufacturing. And he said, you have to balance the both, because that's where you get your money to spend the money on health and education and public goods. And he said, if you don't keep them in balance, you'll get out of whack. Well, in part, the NDP always talked about, and they still do in the Saskatchewan legislature, how to spend your money. They don't tell you how you will make money and create economic activity and economic wealth. So that's standard. And again, by siding with the Liberals, who have just a terrible record in the last 10 years of spending, I mean, in terms of developed countries, we're on the very bottom, and yet you're going to re-elect them because you want to have that spending. I mean, they ended up making a terrible mistake. So, and your first question was?
Well, if we look at Pierre Poilievre's situation in his own riding, does that put his leadership in doubt, or is it pretty clear that he'll continue?
Absolutely clear he will continue. There's no question in my mind, and I think in most Conservatives' mind. I mean, you can criticize him if you like, because he wasn't necessarily perfect or didn't do everything right. But my goodness, he raised the vote up to as high as it's been ever. And if it, other than this false narrative, he'd be the Prime Minister of Canada. I will say a thing about his riding. He won that riding, the old riding, for 20 years. But guess what? They redesigned the riding, and he has a whole bunch of new immigrants that all voted Liberal. And I mean, it was a perfect plan. I don't know who pulled it off, but whoever redesigned that shuffling of the riding, he went from being a natural winner to extremely difficult in one fell swoop. And so it wasn't that he had changed or the people in his original riding had changed. It was the fact that he got a whole bunch of new people as they added to his old riding. So it was, I don't know how they pulled it off, but I mean, obviously it worked. But I know he's in for the long haul, and he'll likely be the new prime minister after this guy.
I'm going to turn to Dan and Marco, but I do understand on the ballot with Mr. Poilievre, there were some 90 other Pierre Poilievres running. And I guess this is an orchestrated campaign to promote the name Pierre Poilievre, but I wonder if that confused people a little bit. What do you think, Dan?
Well, it certainly does. I mean, frankly, when you have 91, it's a chore for people to try to get through the vote. And, I think there has been obviously some questions as to how the boundaries, we used to call it gerrymandering, but no one expected that to happen except for the fact that I think the candidate kept saying, well, I can knock on 15,000 doors. Well, guess what? We all knock on 15,000 doors or more in any given election, as long as period of time up to that. No, I think what's happened here is that Mr. Poilievre will have that opportunity to come back. I have no doubt in my mind, but I think he's going to have to change up a few things. And one of the things he's going to have to tweak team. He's going to have to be people around him because they're very talented. Jean Chrétien did that in 1993 when they attacked him and said, he's yesterday's man and he just didn't have the right stuff. And he said, yes, but I got a great team. And by doing that, he was able to cantilever, if you will, the extent of his support base well beyond his own image, whether you liked him or disliked him. And I think Pierre Poilievre could probably use a tip or two on that because, of course, to those who are saying Pierre Poilievre had no experience in the private sector, I said, neither did Jean Chrétien. And yet he did an extraordinary job. The job application is for government. The job is not to run a department store, assuming they can still stay alive under this current government.
Right on. Marco, any comment on that?
Yes, I think I would agree with that. I'm reminded of the slogan: "We have the plan, we have the people, we will make a difference."
That's right.
Right. So there was a huge emphasis on the fact that a prime minister is not a lone wolf, right? A prime minister is a person who has a team around and behind him, and this is, in fact, probably one of the things that might undermine Carney, because the party is continuing with this sort of presidential adoration of their leader, and that's never really the best thing to do. If Poilievre can essentially put more emphasis on the fact that he has a team behind, and borrowing from Jean Chrétien, that he has a great plan to bring this country back. I think he can forestall what seems to be almost the natural tendency of this party to sort of want to gut their leaders as soon as they don't perform in ways that are expected or over expected. I am with Grant on the same issue that Pierre has performed very well. 91 people. I went and I looked, by the way, at the names and the results of the long list. There was even I think I brought this up the other day. There was a guy who didn't even get a single vote. That means he himself didn't even come out to vote for himself, right? So how pathetic is that? And so the whole thing was a sham. I'm not really sure how I'm going to put my thinking hat on for a little while to see how Elections Canada ought to deal with that, because I understand the issue that you don't want to suppress the democratic impetus and all that stuff, but this is clearly mischief, right?
Indeed. There's a lot of comments here from the audience. It's interesting how a number of you have seem to be agreeing with the thesis that a lot of Canadians voted out of fear. And I did want to pick up the point that I think eloquently you underlined, Grant, and that was the legacy media. seem to be all in, and I want to temper this, that I have not done a research analysis on this, but obviously we all agree that it's important to have a media, that they're to be, it's important to raise the bar, the information level. But is that a fair comment? Were the legacy media, frankly, all in on having the Liberals reelected out of a policy that is premised on the notion that they're funding the media? I mean, we know this to be true. In fact, we even heard in the Carney policy platform was to increase the CBC funding, pardon me, by some $150 million. That strikes me as a major incentive for legacy media to be supportive of a party that supports the policy of funding the media. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
Well, there has to be some concern given seem to be very much in line with with the liberal message, and whether it was because they were this is a new guy, this was the up and coming, this was the honeymoon, if you will, for something new and refreshing, considering what where Trudeau had been and taken us for the past 10 years. I mean, the Liberal Party was finished, done, and buried until, of course, this happened. But it is extraordinarily important. The old perception is reality, and if you're receiving money from the government, whether that's directly or indirectly, and this goes for even those who might be supporting, the Conservatives or other parties, you have to be extraordinarily careful, because it does give rise to the idea that if I'm paying for you, chances are you're doing my bidding, and you can't divorce or get away or separate from that. And a lot of new media has appeared, of course, not subsidized by taxpayers. And it seems that, if you have a Praetorian Guard of not just media, but pollsters, influencers, individuals with, significant connections to the government, of course they're going to say nice things about the government. I've had this fight on the energy front, on the affordability front, even on the food. My good friend, the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois, came up with 2 peer-reviewed studies, which we assisted him in, that proved that the carbon taxes were leading to higher grocery prices. A very important issue, and yet you had government paid economists coming and say, oh, no, that's not true, even though they didn't have peer-reviewed studies. So I think it really comes to the core of what if Canadians are being objective, and I don't think they are, if Canadians are paying attention, which they weren't, and were distracted by Donald Trump and I call the bedwetting over what Trump could or might do and is likely not to do, then of course they would go along with this. But we've not seen any attempt at correction or even much discussion about the fact that those in the media who are taking those positions also have to account for the fact that they had an inextricable link to the interests of maintaining the government. We all know in the case of CBC, the Conservatives are saying they're going to be defunded. If you're the CBC and you're working for the CBC, you're going to find all the talking points of the Liberal Party and you're going to use them as if they are your own. And I saw that happening over and over and over again. So
100%.
100%, Grant?
Well, of course. I mean, that's a very valid point. I mean, if you're working for the CBC and you're getting funded by the government, it's very difficult to take an alternate view. I mean, so you have a built-in bias. That's. I mean, and yet during the campaign you get another $150 million to keep saying the same things. And it's interesting, and I congratulate everybody on this channel for some alternatives. I mean, if you listen to ABC, NBC, and CBS all the time, the Democrats would be in power. But you have Fox News, and Fox News takes the other side and says, well, we're for more free enterprise, and the other people are, more left-wing. Well, we don't have a Fox News. Maybe we will have equivalent someday, but, just to get the fair treatment about the issues and not just a bias day after day after day, who's going to beat up on Donald Trump. I mean, it was false. But so we listen to CBC and CTV, and they're largely funded by the government in power. So, we're asking for a problem. I mean, you're going to get that bias, and the people in there if your son or daughter work for CBC, I mean, they've got to toe the line probably, or they won't certainly be on the national news all the time. So it's right on. It's too bad that we seem to have confined ourselves to the media that is, influenced to such a large degree by the government of the day, and particularly if they tend to be more left wing than otherwise. I mean, it's very, very difficult, and I mean, you see it across Canada too. So no, I think it deserves, as in this conversation, some common sense, real folks talking about what might be the alternatives, because we'll get the same story. Believe me, we've had the same story for decades, certainly in the last 10 years. And despite the fact that the government was very unpopular and we ranked really low in terms of productivity, we're likely going into a recession, and they're reelected. Well, partly was the false narrative, and partly was the media that carried it.
Well said. So, Marco, I want to turn to you in a sec here. I do have a comment from Max Power. There's been many comments from the audience, and we really appreciate it. CBC used to be a more balanced platform when Rex Murphy, may he rest in peace, was still alive and had some fair conservative takes. No one has replaced him, and now CBC is just the propaganda arm of the Liberal Party. Fergus Hodgson said, regime media are an incredibly thorny barrier to free speech and credible elections. Thank you, Fergus. So we've got, I think this is part of the reason why we have relatively low credibility for the legacy media, and yet it seemed like it made a difference. Or what is your sense, Marco? Marco, I think I'd ask you the question. Did the legacy media, would you agree that they made a significant impact in this election? Oh, I think we may have a technical issue. I'm not sure, but we'll come back to Marco. But I do want to turn the page a little bit, and that goes to the question of the new government and the state of our nation. And I want to turn to you, Grant, and Dan, on the question of what should be the priorities of this new Carney government. We've obviously got the past Trudeau legacy, the last 10 years of economic stagnation, the war on oil and gas in this country, frankly, the war on traditional culture as well. I'd say you've got a myriad of issues to deal with. So if you were advising the Prime Minister Carney, what would you say would be your action plan going forward? Dan, do you want to go first, and then Grant?
Well, I would take off originally started, and that's the carbon tax. You got rid of it temporarily, make it permanent. No industrial carbon tax, no second carbon tax, clean fuel standard. Work to get rid of the OBPS. No more caps on emissions. No blocking pipelines. Not tolerating any kind of lawfare or interference with the approval process that the previous government did. It wound up costing us $34 billion in the case of the Trans Mountain expansion. And if start dealing with EV mandates. EV mandates, which are failing. These companies are going bankrupt. No one wants to buy these unless they get massive subsidies, which we don't have any money for. BC's next week going to shut down subsidies for EVs. And at the same time, recognize the real cost and consequence, not with orange-haired man bad south of the border, but with China. You're bludgeoning, Western Canadian farmers in canola because you think that you can prop up an EV manufacturing and invent something the Chinese got a 10-year advantage on us. I say this not just because as a politician, as a liberal, these are the pragmatic things I've done. I worked for Toyota Canada as public relations director. Full disclosure, this is a company that didn't want to go down this road of grifting. But I think we have to have a prime minister who can actually say, rather than spending $250 billion to borrow that we can't, and now Fitch is saying, you do that, and we're going to downgrade your credit. And I can imagine that Dominion Bond Rating Agency and the rest are going to do the same. What is the implication? The implication is you haven't got, as the old expression, you haven't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. So it's time to recognize these are dire straits, and that if you don't get around very quickly, your time as a prime minister is going to be nasty, brutish, and short.
All right. Wow. Well, that's a very colorful mixture of metaphors and let alone quotes from the great Thomas Hobbes. Over to you, Grant. What do you say?
Well, that was well said. That I agree 100%. 100%. I mean, I'll give the new prime minister time to see if he can do what he said he's going to do. I mean, he's changed his clothing, and he sounds like a free enterpriser economic development guy. And
but did he really change his clothing? Like I did read his book called Values, and I was frankly gobsmacked in terms of its policy direction. As it's all about net zero, it's frankly, I would say, one of the most radical summaries of environmental policy I've read in a long time, and I've read quite a bit. So, pardon me, I interrupted you, Grant, but
no,
I'm
you're
just
right.
really curious because he seemed to be. Am I misreading this? He seemed to be not entirely upfront in terms of what the policy direction was, or at least he seemed to be constantly. Well, the whole comment about Canada being an energy superpower always seemed to be qualified as really being one that was transitioning, to wind energy and how that's going to work in minus 40-degree weather.
Yeah.
When there's no wind.
I mean, he he changed his suit, if you will, to become the leader of the Liberal Party and to be the Prime Minister. You pointed out very clearly. I mean, his past is not there. What he talked about during the campaign was taking on Trump, but about doing these economic things that he thought would sound pretty good. Now, if he follows through on those, I'll buy it. I'll support him if he builds pipelines, if he cuts the carbon tax, if he gets common sense suggestions to improve our economy, as perhaps a banker should. I mean, if that's his ace in the hole that he's been a banker, well, fair enough. But he's got to show the results of that. He can't just sweet talk them now. I mean, he's got to deliver. If he does, I mean, he'll get some credit from people across the country. If we can deliver LNG to Europe and we've got pipelines and we've got, God forbid, no carbon tax. I mean, you could write a book about the carbon tax. I mean, it's just the silliest thing any country's done in a long, long time. I mean, where carbon is 0.04% of the atmosphere and 1% of that, and the population is 1% of that. We have zero impact on the atmosphere, zero. And yet we're punishing people as if we can change the atmosphere. And China builds a new coal-fired plant every other week. India's doing the same. The Soviets do the same. I mean, it's so silly and to have and painful and so irrational. And then we've been sold a bill of goods. Now, if people support that again, I'd be surprised, but I hope he just axes it all together. Make no sense. On my farm, I need more CO2. If you add CO2 to my canola and my grain, it goes up in productivity. And in terms of carbon sink, the ocean is 70% of the world and the trees are another 20%, and all continuous farming here. I mean, it's just bizarre that we're saying that we have too much CO2. I mean, and there's lots of evidence. So you could get me going on this, but fair enough. I give him the benefit of the doubt. He talked the line. Let's see if he walks the line.
Okay, so let's see the action. Let's verify, and let's see what the Carney government is really all about. So, Dan, you're also, and I apologize, I neglected to also introduce you as the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. So, Grant's outline regarding the efficacy of a carbon tax, and I know you've been an articulate critic of the carbon tax. So we're mixing up our C's here today at Leaders on the Frontier. What do you say, Dan, to the carbon tax? Was that good public policy?
Yeah, well, it was the reason the Liberals lost much in support across the country. It's the reason that Mark Carney temporarily suspended it. He didn't get rid of the carbon tax. It's still there. It's just going to come out in a different form, which most trendy economists who up until Carney was elected said it's the best form of carbon tax we could have. But that's like a little bit like saying choose your poison. Whichever you choose, it's going to be deadly. The fact is we have, unlike some of the, William Nordhaus is a very famous economist, got a Nobel Prize for his stuff on climate and carbon taxes. And he said, countries that implement these things should never have duplicate carbon taxes. They shouldn't have a carbon tax and a clean fuel standard, and then a series of regulations on top of that to really strangle the production of hydrocarbons. Even if you were in a pure country that didn't have third largest resources of these products in the world, which are directly connected to our standard of living, like it or not. This was a really stupid idea to not just heap one, but several carbon taxes on, and then come up with some other trendy ideas, but at the same time saying, well, maybe we should just have Canadians pay for this, or industry pay for this, or maybe in order to ensure that we don't have anybody competing with industry in Canada, we're now going to erect, which I think Carney's going to do, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. What does that mean? Well, hey, folks, when you go to Walmart and Dollarama next time to buy your cheap goods, guess what? They're made in China, and they're going to put a tax on those things. So you voted for something that it makes absolutely no sense. I'm with Grant on this. For 1% of 0.04% of the entire Earth's atmosphere, and these scientists don't even have an understanding of how intricate it is. My sense of thinking, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure these things out, but you do have to understand what damage this did to the Canadian economy. Affordability was the issue. They were able to move away. They're not going to be able to move away very long. And at the end of the day, if you have a plan that's going to continue to drive up the cost of everything and drive wedges between regions of the country, it doesn't matter what your cool, trendy proposals are and the kind of cutting around the edges. At the end of the day, Mark Carney's company, Brookfield, didn't just hijack it out of Canada. They bought the Colonial Pipeline, the largest pipeline in the world, the most important pipeline the United States has. It is truly the aortic energy vein of the United States. They now own a pipeline. Now they've been blocking them here in Canada, but beyond that, maybe we should talk about Brookfield and Mr. Carney's. We haven't heard anything about his assets. What are his liabilities? What are his assets? What are his conflict of interests? Boy, they're going to have a fun time trying to manage that.
To tell everyone that at Frontier, regardless of which party's in power, we do have or do try to be sensible advocates for commonsensical public policy. And I just want to highlight to everyone that on our website at Frontier, we do have a 12-point plan to renew Canada's prosperity and unity. And that includes many things, including freeing internal markets and restoring energy and industrial freedom. There's a list right there that we're displaying there, but take a look at it. We'd love your feedback. But one of them is, of course, communications and media reform, much along the lines of those just actually discussed today. But clearly, we have a lot of work to do in this country to strengthen it. And we would say Canada is not strong. Canada is a great country, but it is not strong. It's been, frankly, one of decline. So one of the aspects, though, of this discussion, and this is a big one, has to do with national unity. It has to do with the fact that you have a divide in this country in terms of policy and many, many other dynamics. We know that the great provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan are really, I think, very ambivalent, to put it politely, regarding the electoral outcomes and the concerns and legitimate questions regarding their aspirations to grow their provinces and prosperity. And so as we look to that question, what do you think is the state of the nation, Marco, as we look to that very, very real risk that, well, provinces will say it's not enough to pursue our sovereignty, the power within Canada, but we need to look for other options. Where do you think we're at, Marco?
We're very much at the same place that we were in 1867 in some respects, because the reality is that the framework of this federation was set to advantage the central power or the Laurentian provinces, Quebec and Ontario. All you need to do is look at the composition of the Senate and things like that to realize. But what has changed is the culture, and politics is always, as they say, downstream from the culture. That has made it even worse. We live in a world in which people actually believe that raising taxes will essentially influence the climate. We live in a world where we think that the guys next door are coming to invade us and they're going to steal all our money and kill our children, et cetera, et cetera. We live in a world where men are women and women are men at whim. And once you start with that, then people can believe everything and anything the government tells them. And so that is the framing of the problem that compounds the problem that this federation is essentially sort of skewed one way. So Alberta and Saskatchewan, no surprise, are among the very few places in the country that are bucking at many of these trends. But in spite of their common sense and their rationality, they do not have the political power to back them up. And so that will need to change. Albertans and the people of Saskatchewan want that to change. And I don't think the rest of the country are going to be able to stop them this time around.
Okay. What's your observation, Grant?
Well, it's I guess it's a degree of respect. We produce an awful lot of food in the West and an awful lot of energy. Food is the biggest industry in the world, and the fertilizer industry is right behind it to make it work, and the transportation industry, and energy, fires it all up. And we're a gift to the country, and to some degree, we feel not only somewhat neglected, but overtaxed, huge transfer payments, more and more money coming out of here, and not a lot of regard for the tremendous wealth that we create here without any real encouragement. In fact, the carbon tax is just, just a slap in the face, particularly for the industry. And then as an agriculture person, I mean, everything, if you tax carbon tax on fertilizer and carbon tax on trucking and carbon tax on processing and carbon tax on manufacturing, distribution, and in retailing, and my background as a PhD is in food retailing, all of those add to food costs. And so it's not only that we produce the wealth from the agriculture industry, we're getting hit in the head with the fact that food prices are going up here right in my hometown of Saskatoon because of a penalty that is irrational, but provides an excuse in many cases. And in my research and food retailing, people can take advantage of that. Not everybody, but you add the carbon tax, and because in your industry and processing, this is the carbon tax. But I can add another point or two and call it the carbon tax, and then it goes right through to the retailers. And if you look at retailing and food prices right here, there's no excuse. It's not fair. It's not accurate. And I would bet my farm that if you did the kind of research that I did years and years ago at the University of Alberta and with Mrs. Burrell Plumtree and the Food Prices Review Board, and they admitted price discrimination clearly. And we've given them the excuse to do that. Not only does it hurt the producer and the farming and the agriculture industry, but the excuse through the whole supply chain to add costs and get away with it. And I'm not picking on anybody, but I have research to show that that was the case, and they admitted price discrimination. In one case, a large retailer couldn't open a new store for 9 years in the province of Alberta. Admitted price discrimination. That's without the carbon tax. Now, if you give them some excuses, and then the fact that we provide a great deal of transfer payments, a great deal of wealth, feed a large number of people around the world, and you ask why, you're absolutely right, despite Confederation, I mean, common sense would say you would be an honest brother, sister, family member, and show a little more regard. And you can understand why people get tired of it. I mean, tired of it.
But to be clear here, Grant Devine.
I mean, I feel the frustration, and I'm not a separatist, but I'll tell you, there's real, honest to goodness frustration from the way we're being treated, and it's somewhat irrational. It makes no sense to me, politically or otherwise. Why would you want to make one of your best producing areas feel so alienated? I don't get it.
Okay, but let's put this into perspective. Is this a tenuous moment now? Are we at a kind of an 1867 moment, as Marco referred to, in the sense that this is going to get us back to the fundamental discussion around what is the vision for this country and what are provincial rights to develop their province? And is this rapidly becoming a collision course where the country is hanging in the balance? Is that where we're at, Grant?
No, I think it's real, but I don't think it's in the balance. I mean, most Canadians, most people in Saskatchewan, and in fact, I have family and relatives and have lived and worked in Alberta, love the country, but they are damned upset, and they deserve to be. So I wouldn't encourage separation, but I encourage you to speak loudly and speak often, as I think both premiers will. And both premiers have to cope with this rising view of, some independence and so forth. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to calm them down. I can get excited, but some people get a lot more excited than I do. So I think common sense and patience and understanding and appreciation. I think the Prime Minister should come out here. He needs to come out here, and he needs to sit down with the premiers, and he needs to sit down with people in this rural municipalities and the urban municipalities and rural and urban people across Western Canada and say, I understand you. Well, for heaven's sakes, he's from Edmonton. I don't know what happened to him, but he needs to help fix this. And I think that he could go a long ways, and I would encourage him sincerely to come out here and sit down and listen. And then if he does some of the things he says he's going to do, he can largely, remove some of that frustration. But he's got to deliver. He's got to deliver.
Sounds like good advice, Dan. What are your thoughts in terms of where we're at as a country here in terms of unity?
Well, I don't think Quebec separation is in vogue anymore. I mean, they're doing very well. But I kind of try to provide my own family analogy. Head of the house, mother, father, 3, 4 kids. The eldest son is the one that's out working, producing, probably coming up with 40% of the entire income that keeps the family and the house and the roof and the food on the table. And yet we're treating the eldest son as if they're some kind of mongrel, some kind of not important member of the family. Smallest room, don't give them any support. And I think that's perhaps the way, and I get this. I'm from Ontario. I get how Alberta and Saskatchewan, parts of British Columbia may very well feel that they're very passionate about being Canadian. There's no question about their devotion to the country. But how many more cheeks can you turn? How many more times can you be slapped? We're asking of them to pay their taxes so they can create an equalization program in this country that supports 7 of the 10 provinces that fall under that equation. And yet we kind of find ways to stop their ability to make ends meet, stop their ability to be creative, make them proud of the fact that they're very much a part of this country. And, when I hear things like, oh, we're going to build pipelines, we're going to build an energy corridor. Oh, by the way, natural gas, if it's according to Jean Chrétien, but at the same time, impose emission caps, which would make those pipelines useless, irrelevant, redundant, and probably 2/3 empty. I mean, to me, that sounds like a part of the country that is voting in favor of continuing this kind of paternalism that I think is so vexing to people in the part of the country who deserve nothing more than our appreciation for the fact that their hard work, their devotion, their willingness to get resources to the market, because after all, and Grant Devine can speak better to this than I can. People don't come to Canada looking for our EVs or our manufacturing to the extent that they come to our country because they want our potash, they want our uranium, they want our oil, and they want our natural gas. And last time I checked, the region of the country that has the most of those is the one we're also tending to disregard. In the last election, we should have had a lot more discussion about the West, not just in terms of alienation, but in terms of their ability to keep and balance the books for the country and to maintain our prosperity. Because without Alberta and Saskatchewan, we're in big trouble in this country.
Indeed. And don't forget uranium, among many other things, critical minerals. I mean, the list is crazy, but no, well said. So we're at a crossroads, and this conversation is going to continue. So I did want to share a clip here. Madam Producer, I believe it's from a premier named Daniel Smith.
Albertans are hurt and betrayed. That's how I think Albertans are feeling. I think Canada as a whole got a sense of that feeling of hurt and betrayal with the way the Americans are treating us right now. But we've been treated that way for the last 10 years. Treated like We should be just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. I think that's what you were seeing in this last election. And I think Albertans want to share my view that we want to be able to have Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. But we also would like to see Team Canada be on Team Alberta for once. And so I, at the very beginning of the campaign, said whoever got elected, I would expect them to address the 9 offensive pieces of legislation and policy that prevent us from being able to exercise our constitutional jurisdiction to develop our resources. I've put that on the table. I know that the opposition leader said that they were very reasonable. Prime Minister Carney, it's a little unclear. He's given the...
So there you go. There's quite a statement from Premier Daniel Smith. I know that Premier Scott Moe has also called for a reset of sorts in terms of the federal relationship. And of course, the history is extensive here, where you have a pattern of the federal government sticking its fingers arguably into the constitutional affairs of provinces. So what is your sense of, we're getting kind of towards the end of our extensive conversation. It's been a very good one, and I really appreciate the audience's comments. We've even had some news outlets here watching and listening to the conversation, including Juno News, so a warm welcome to you. And I also have comments like Matthew says, Alberta has to answer to the chiefs before trying to act on its own, I believe. I think that relates to the whole challenge of First Nations as well. And I guess I would just point out as well that there's been a lot of work that has gone into thinking through some of these issues, including what's called the Clarity Act. And I'm wondering to what extent that actually provides meaningful guidance on what are the next steps around, well, where this could potentially go. Any comment, Marco?
Yeah, this could go in very many different ways. I think Grant is right that the Prime Minister coming out and smoothing some of the ruffled feathers, the many ruffled feathers, could improve the situation. But it goes further than that. Alberta specifically has been here before. We have had sort of smooth talking Central Canadians coming out saying that, you know, everything is going to be all right. Prime Minister Trudeau, remember, wondered if putting some new officer in charge of dealing with the West was going to make things better. And words matter, so that would make some kind of change. But if all the offending legislation that, for example, Danielle was alluding to, C-69, I mean, there's just a whole list of them, remain in place, no amount of talking is going to solve this issue, right? Because the structural problem remains, the sort of disjointing issues and the imbalance of power, all those things are there, and they need to be addressed. The conundrum is that, not to sound too much like a Marxist, I am not, even though the other day somebody said that I was a communist in the comments or something like that. Yeah, I took a screen grab of that one. The idea is that people who have power don't relinquish it just because. And so Central Canada isn't simply going to give up all their excess number of senators or whatever to balance things out. This will have to be coming to a crunch of some sort. So words are good, diplomacy works, but the fundamental structures of the culture and the country need to change.
Okay, so Marco, I hear your point that I think that's a very astute comment, that there are also deeper issues here. If the institutions, like the Senate is certainly an example. I mean, this kind of discussion has been around for quite a while. There's been concerns about a number of those institutions, including population, you know, in terms of representation within the House of Commons. There's a lot of issues here. So is that part of the solution that needs to be discussed here, Grant Devine?
Well, it certainly would be part of it. I mean, the way the country is set up, I mean, I often I admire the United States, which gives election by population to the House, and then 2 senators per state. And you got 600,000 people in North Dakota, and they're as powerful as California, with, the 4th largest, one of the countries in the world for economic development. But that really balances it, and it makes the smaller. And North Dakota is a little bit like Saskatchewan and Alberta. They're very wealthy in oil and in agriculture, and they have 2 solid senators. And it doesn't matter what their political party is. I mean, they're going to stick up for North Dakota. And so we're stuck with a Senate that doesn't work. And the distribution of voters and the percentage of voters in provinces still isn't quite fair. I mean, you compare the growth and the size of the province of Alberta to, say, Nova Scotia, and they've, it's biased. And I'm not picking on Nova Scotia, but I think we have a structural problems and deficiencies that we have to address in this country. And I don't have the answers, but to identify them at least is important. To know that we have some built-in inefficiencies and imperfections that skew the results. So it's going to take, lots of political scientists and others to figure out how best to pull this off, and some political will. But I think the fact that we can recognize some of these imperfections and begin to talk about them, which again may lead to more fairness in how we administer the country, and to the Prime Minister and others, and say, I mean, how can you look at this bias when, it's evident? Can you begin to think, or can you act, and not just talk about it, not just put an envoy out there that has a pretty face, but can you actually talk about being and sharing in the wealth of creating fairness for, your distant regions of the country? So, anyway, there's no simple solution, but I think the fact that you brought it up, I think the fact that we can talk about it, and I think you can have leaders talk about it, just looking for common sense. How can we make this country work better? It's a beautiful, fantastic country, but we've been hurting, and we're continuing to hurt because the structure of the nation is unfair. I think the liberalization of trade across Canada is going to be very good if it's pulled off. I would endorse it 100%. To give an example for what you should be doing, so that at least you can talk about it to the rest of the world. So, and I'm a big free trader, so in my best dreams, I hope that this discussions with the President of the United States results in lower and lower and lower tariffs worldwide, and we'd all be better off. So
You're here.
Right on. So I want to begin to wrap up our conversation, and I suppose I want to turn to you, Dan, and ask you, what is your advice in terms of our country moving forward? I mean, I think there's been some very good practical advice here around the need for leaders, the Prime Minister included, to be able to reach out, frankly, to all parts of the country, including Western Canada, and come to some understanding around actions that would say, we're hearing your concerns, we're listening. And that is often the pathway to unity, is to be able to say, hey, we're hearing you, but we're also acting. So during this time, I just want to thank the audience for all your comments here. It's interesting. Karen McClellan says Conservatives wanted change, especially the youth who feel hopeless and don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Trying to unify the country is going to be Carney's litmus test. Does that sound like a fair comment, Marco?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that Prime Minister Carney has going for himself is that the election period is over. If you remember when he came to talk to Danielle Smith, one of the first things that the Premier said was that the Prime Minister was talking out of both sides of his mouth. That he was saying one thing in the East and one thing in the West. That he had said something to her that he completely negated by saying something else in Quebec. And that is in part the reality of the sort of regional divisions in this country when people are trying to get elected. So if we extend some generosity to the Prime Minister, say, okay, he was politicking, he was trying to get himself elected, maybe now, and he's not a stupid man, he's a smart guy, he's going to grab the bull by the horns and wrestle with the fundamental issues that this country needs in order to right itself. I choose to believe that he's capable of doing that, and that he will try to do that.
What do you think, Grant?
Well, I'm hopeful as well. I'd be very difficult to fall back on many of the observations they made about economic development and spending literally billions on investment. Well, investment is in productivity. I mean, it's not. That's what it's for. So, if it isn't in, as he said, if it isn't in pipelines and in economic development where there are possibilities, where you have the resources, then it was just talk. So I am cautiously optimistic. He will hang on to his words, and he will provide some incentives and attitudinal change towards economic development. The country is, we're in really difficult shape after the last 10 years, and he's got a big job in his hands. And I will, if he does what he says I think I heard him do, I'll support him 110% as a leader. But he's got a tough row to hoe. I'm not making excuses for him, but no matter who was in charge, we've got a big job. No matter who's in charge. I mean, it's huge.
We really do.
But if he's aligned with Poilievre on some of the things that really can help us get out of this, then I'll support him in government to get the things done he said he was going to do.
Okay, so I see Dan McTeague back on here, and I understand can be frustrating some of the technical issues, but I do want to comment, and then I want to turn to you, Dan, in terms of next steps. I really believe that our country has facing enormous challenges, as you've all said. I think the audience resonates with that, and I think this is truly from the evidence and our care and concern for our country. And I look at this and I say, if I look at it both financially and otherwise, I mean, I look at a number of provinces that have recently been downgraded from a credit perspective. I know that the federal government needs to table a budget in fairly short order. That would be my sense of it. We're looking at continued massive deficits and debt. And I look at the conversation relative to unity, where there's provinces who frankly are behind Canada's leading industry. And this is something I believe, I could be wrong, it would be a very important research question, is to what extent Canadians even understand that oil and gas is our number one industry, period. And if that is in some type of, shall I say, being under stress, that we can't get our energy to market. And at Frontier, we're very proud how a number of days ago we released the energy calculator showing the kind of money we're forfeiting, some 30 billion at least of oil and gas revenues, because we can't get our act together and get world prices. I mean, this is outrageous in terms of the welfare of our country. I submit to you that the other parties that vote during an election are the bondholders. And I don't think anyone would be looking at us as a rating agency and say, how is it not possible that you're going to retain a AAA rating at the federal government level with this kind of conversation and jeopardy of emission in the balance? I just look at this and I think, how is this going to play out? And I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but this is about risk and managing risk from a very sensible, rational way. And it behooves our leadership to see that bigger picture. So my question is, what would you do, Dan, as you look to the future here to really get this country moving again? And why can't we call a national emergency? And no, I don't mean the trucker convoy national emergency. I mean a real national urgency to get these utility corridors so we can get energy to Tidewater. Now, we built this national gas pipeline, and don't quote me, in a matter of 2 years. In the 1950s, there's a big debate about it. And instead of going through the United States, they had the vision, including C.D. Howe, as I recall, to make that pipeline possible. What do we need to do to get this country back on track?
Guarantee that those pipelines, that corridor that we build, in fact, will be honored by the Canadian government. Listen, the biggest problem investors have with bringing money to Canada to build out our resource sector, which is absolutely indispensable to our future in this country, regardless of where you live in the country, because we all benefit by it, is that we have been basically saying two messages. One, yeah, build it, but then we're going to block it. And we allow every fanatic and every lawfare and every warrior to go out there, twist our Indigenous people into pretzels, make them opposed to things that could very well improve their quality of life as well as the rest of us, which we all want. There is something called the Commonwealth, and that is something that with our resources that are given to all Canadians, a tremendous blessing. But we have a number of regulators who sit there, as I used to say years ago, with pipes in their mouth and patches on their arms and wearing desert boots. I sound like I'm from the 60s. And they were finding all sorts of trendy ways to shut down our resource sector. Unless you get rid of the blocking of pipelines, unless you're prepared to honor the agreements that you make when the imperature of the Crown actually means something, you're not going to let anybody tolerate people blocking these things. If we can say that and we can demonstrate that to the rest of the world, I think you'll find that we'll have a lot of investments in this country. And the last thing we need to do is turn around and tell people, oh, we want you to eat less. We want you to tax your nitrogen, or we want you to use less things that will help us. So that's important. And I think in the context of how we proceed, let's not just say Canada's open for business, but let's do so in the spirit of making sure that whatever we agree to, we damn well stand behind it, as opposed to allowing every Tom, Dick, and Harry to take pot shots at us.
Well said.
I'm sure that I can summarize that we've had an incredible conversation today, and we care about our country, and we all want to move it forward. So in that spirit, I want to thank every one of our guests, the Honorable Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy and former Liberal member, as well as Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, Vice President at Frontier Research and Policy, and of course, the Honorable Grant Devine. It's been a privilege and honor to have you join us as well today as you reflect on these key issues. And I want to thank the audience for joining us. What a fantastic conversation. Share this with your friends and family. And we value your input, and we want to thank you so much for joining us all today for this important topic. And be with us next week on Thursday. We're going to have another incisive conversations, including about the national unity issue, and I'm sure you'll be delighted to join us. So thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for watching